The topic given was my vision of public health in India. And Dr. Rachan Chand sir gave me some guidelines to talk about. So, and he has given a long list, but I'm not going to cover the whole list because it will take long time. What I thought is some of the topical things and some of the things which are required, I'll talk about, and then we will have a discussion. So first, I want to begin with this COVID vaccination. We are greatly delighted that we have two vaccines or two vaccine manufacturers in India, and we were the sort of most happy when these vaccines were officially launched and licensed for emergency use in India early in January. And our vision is to vaccinate as fast as possible. But I'm going to give you some numbers and see what we have landed up with. For example, it is very clear that our country is a continent of 138 crores people. If you take 60%, which is adults, because the vaccines are only for adults, it comes to like 83 crores. If you count 2 doses, it is 166 crores. And then if you divide by 12 months, it is 13 crore doses or roughly 14 crore doses per month. And you divide by 30 days, it is 40 lakh doses we have to give. So that is a simple maths. Currently, we are giving half the number of doses, roughly 20 lakh doses. So it will take about 2 years at this speed to vaccinate everybody. So which is not really what we want. Our vision is as fast as possible. So if you take the vaccine manufacturing capacity, which is 5 crores per month in Serum Institute, 2 crores in Bharat Biotech, so 7 crores. If you take the doses required, it is again coming to about 25 or 24 months to make those doses. So it is also clear that we can't vaccinate faster because we don't have the supply. Now, these calculations, I don't know why the country as a whole, I'm not blaming anybody or asking anybody, why nobody realized which a maths 7th standard student should be able to do. We don't need a PhD to do this calculation. And now we are stuck saying that we must increase the capacity and we can't be waiting 24 months to get everybody vaccinated. Now, had we started in July 2020, when the first candidate vaccine appeared and started its third phase trials, we would have calculated. Pardon? Are you able to hear? Hello? Okay, so July 2020, if we have started and started increasing the vaccine capacity, calculating from there, we would have been in a better position. Even giving orders, we first order, as I understand, was given in early January with 3 crore doses when we required 166 crore doses. That time, Serum Institute had 10 crore doses already made. Later on, April, we gave order of 15 crore doses. So the question is, why is this happening? And we can discuss that. Then the second issue, which I want to start by saying that we are a billion people country, but Abdul Kalam had said in one of his very famous quotes that we think as if we are a million people country. So we had two suppliers, one buyer, and we thought this is very bad. It's not a perfect market for economists. This is a very oligopolistic market and oligopolistic buyer. So we decided that this is not good. So we can't increase the suppliers, so let us increase the buyers. So our policy changed to saying states should buy, private sector should buy. So from one buyer, we went to 33 buyers, at least state governments and maybe more with private sector. So it became a competitive market. So the question is, will the rate go down with this? And obviously answer is not rate will not go down, it will go up perhaps. And it had already started going up with this differential rate. So now we are looking for more suppliers of vaccine and how to increase the production. So in some sense, the lesson is that can we think ahead of time as a government, as people, as a society, as economists, as health personnel, of what should we have 2 years, 5 years from hence, and start working on that. And in all these things, in the vaccine, we had not expected, but the second wave came and almost 2 lakh people additionally died during the second wave. Fortunately, we are now sort of on the waning part of the second wave, and we will have to fix the vaccine supply issue. So I think the first thing which I wanted to say in my vision is that we should be able to at least do very simple calculations for a country of 1 billion. Not think that we are a 1 million country or 5 million or 10 million or many countries in one. And think of basic economies of scale, which should be in our public systems able to do. Plan ahead. The other side is, why didn't we pay the manufacturers? Because we were not perhaps willing to take risk. And some of you, I'm sure, have worked in government. You understand government better. I don't understand government policies and the ways of working so well. But paying a private manufacturer in advance seems to be a very risky proposition in an environment where we don't know whether vaccine will come up or not. Of course, Bangladesh government had paid in advance. Many other governments paid multiple times their vaccine requirements and booked them. So, okay, we did make some mistakes. So what is going forward? So the lesson is that we don't have a national adult vaccination program. Of course, we will scramble and this epidemic and pandemic will go and we will be able to vaccinate. Now we understand that about 2 billion vaccines will be available by December. But can we take this as a challenge to develop a vaccination program for flu, which we haven't looked at? In Western countries, there is a old age flu vaccination program. They buy vaccine of the new viruses which are going to come and stock it. And if that virus doesn't come, that vaccine is thrown away, because you can't be making a vaccine when a new virus or modified virus comes. So we have to also learn and develop an adult vaccination. Hepatitis B, of course, now it is in children's vaccine, but there are lots of adults who are not covered. Human papilloma virus, which is causing cervical cancer in women, and maybe other diseases, vaccines will come. So I think the first vision or first this thing is, can we take this example of what we went through and are going to go through for next 1 month, year, and develop a national, and if national is not possible, even some of the states are bigger than many nations, so develop a state level adult vaccination program which will include such vaccines in future. So that was the first point. Second vision is to catch up with Europe's death registration system and cause of death analysis, which existed in the year 1665 under the name of Bills of Mortality of London. And I have 2 pages of that, the cover page and one of the pages of how systematically London compiled, analyzed, and printed the cause of death happening in London every week during 1665 and around that time for many, many years. This was the years where plague epidemics were happening, and if you can read it in this line, there is a 6,544 number. All other numbers are 45, 1, 2, etc. But just one line, plague, killed 6,544 people in this week, which is from 12th September to 19th September 1665. Now, will any one of you tell me that does your city, wherever you live, publishes such numbers even today on weekly basis? And my answer, at least as much as I know, is no. No city yet has caught up of the analysis of death in London, which was available in 1665. So you can't do public health without registering deaths and analyzing them. What is India's way of counting deaths is this, what we have been seeing on the TV. Drone pictures of all these fires in the crematorium, the Ganges in some parts with floating corpses, and we are guessing how many people died in this pandemic. The government number is 3 lakhs. The estimated number by, I don't know what to call them, anti-nationals or something like that, their number is 10 lakhs, 20 lakhs, something like that. So why is this? Why can't we record cause of death? So my other plea and this thing is each city should be able to record how many people died and how many cremations happened yesterday and compare it with what is the average it should happen given its population. So estimated normal mortality and yesterday's mortality or day before or last week's mortality. This is like a barometer for a weather person or a thermometer for a doctor, that it tells you that whether everything is normal or not. If your mortality is normal, whatever is happening, by and large, the state or country or city is okay. Now, why are the crematoriums full? If you do or know a little bit of demography, with 140 crore population and crude death rate of 7 deaths per 1,000, which is crude death rate per year, you will have roughly 98 lakh deaths per year in India, which is roughly say 1 crore deaths. If you divide it by 365, which is 27,400 deaths per day in India happens every day without any epidemic, pandemic, anything. It's a normal background mortality. Now, if you take government's number of 4,000 COVID deaths happening in India around that for last some days, weeks, which is roughly about 15% more deaths, the number will come to 31,400 deaths per day in India. Now, with just 15% additional deaths, why should crematoriums be overflowing? What is the crematorium's capacity utilization in India on an average any given day? You may have gone to crematoriums for some of your relatives before the pandemic. My rough estimate is 30% to 50%, 40% in the daytime. In nighttime, most of the crematoriums 0% utilization. So if you take 24-hour utilization, it will be half of this, 15 to 30% or 20%. So in that case, why is the crematoriums overflowing with just 4,000 deaths happening additionally in the country per day? So the answer is that there are a lot of more deaths happening, but we are not counting them as COVID deaths. So my plea is that please learn to count the dead and write the correct cause of death. Now, counting, I'm sure all of you will agree that it is not so difficult. Ahmedabad, for example, has something like 30 crematoriums and maybe 10, 12 burial grounds. So at the end of the day, I have to only total about 40 numbers, and each crematorium or burial ground will not have more than 5, 10 normally, maybe in this thing 20, 30, 50. So adding 50 numbers is a child's exercise and I will know how many people died yesterday in Ahmedabad. But somehow our cities haven't thought that it is important to total up the number of deaths. The other side, which I showed you in the bills of mortality, is the cause of death. Now, here lies the main confusion in India and many doctors' minds, many experts' minds. Of course, ICMR has given good guideline for COVID, and earlier Director General of Health Services, taking from international guidance, have also given guidelines several years ago. Cause of death is not a rocket science. And in 5 minutes or 2 minutes, I'll show you, you can become also expert in analyzing cause of death of COVID. I'm giving you 4 rules for that. Rule number 1, if patient has COVID and other no comorbidity and dies, then of course everybody will agree that it is a COVID death. If a patient has pre-existing comorbidity like diabetes, high blood pressure, cancer, and then COVID and develops a respiratory failure, can't breathe, you have to give oxygen, so his lungs are all filled up. He develops some complications of clotting and dies, then of course it's a COVID death, even though he had a pre-existing diabetes, hypertension. Because the question you have to answer, if COVID had not happened, would that diabetes fellow had died on that day? Or would that blood pressure fellow had died on that day? If the answer is no, then the precipitating cause is the underlying cause, which is COVID killed him. With diabetes, hypertension, cancer, people can survive for a long time. So that is the second example. Third example, and I put it in green, which is a little complicated. Suppose he tests very mild COVID, so just positive, no symptoms, all blood parameters you check, they are normal. So that means he has no oxygen requirement, his blood clotting, everything is normal. With some severe comorbidity develops and he develops a heart attack or stroke and dies, then maybe it is not because of COVID. Because COVID had started but had not become so serious to kill him, but he had some other severe comorbidity which killed him, which are very few cases. So COVID is incidental and the main disease is heart attack, stroke, kidney, etc. The only complication is COVID in the second, third week or later on, if his blood parameters are not normal, clotting is increased, then it will cause all of this. And then still COVID will be the cause, not heart attack, stroke and kidney. Fourth, a COVID patient killed in a road accident. The cause of death is road accident, not COVID. COVID patient commits suicide. Still doubtful whether what will you classify, but it can be classified as non-COVID because it's a suicide death. He got so depressed because of COVID that he died. So with these 4 or 5 rules and with good guidance from ICMR, we are still not able to classify our deaths in a reasonable manner. Now, whose responsibility it is? Of course, it is the doctors treating people. And if the death happens, then maybe family to tell what happened, and based on that, the registrar of death or the local person will have to enter the cause of death. But the RGI, Registrar General of India, all registrars of birth and death, please take note, and you should speak up saying what is happening to India. Why so many deaths are happening? Are they COVID, not COVID? If they are not COVID, then what is wrong? Is there some other virus? Is there some other cause? We should be worried. We can't just say it is not COVID and forget about it. And we see that thousands of people are dying. So the registrars of birth and death's duty is to tell us whether the overall mortality is normal or abnormal. If it is abnormal, why it is abnormal? And that is what we need to learn. And Europe has an interesting system. If some of you want to see, Euromomo is the site, MOMO, Euromomo. It gives you all European countries' weekly mortality with its comparison with the past trends and will tell you whether in which week the mortality is more or less. Okay, I want to come to this. This is our government's logo. It means the victory of the truth, but it also implies that all must speak truth and we should not obfuscate whatever we know and confuse people, because that will only lead to prolongation of this epidemic. Okay, moving away from the epidemic to an issue which happens every day, every night, every week, every month. And one of my friends, a senior IAS officer, now retired and was the health secretary of Gujarat, health commissioner, gave this name called Taj Mahal syndrome. All of you know why Taj Mahal was built. It was built by Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan in the memory of his wife Mumtaz Mahal, who died in 14th childbirth in Behranpur. So she had very difficult childbirth and she died. And the king was so much in love that he made this big monument. And it is world famous. It is India's great sort of tourist attraction, etc., etc. On the right-hand side panel, I'm showing you Queen of Sweden. Eleonora was her name. And she, around the same time, about 350 years ago, also had difficult pregnancy. And in Sweden, there was nobody who could save her or who could help her. The Swedish king sent this Swedish doctor, John van Vroon, to go to France, learn midwifery, come back and help his queen or his wife. And luckily, with this knowledge gained from France, this woman, the queen, was saved. But the king of Spain was so humiliated, felt so humiliated. How come I can save my own wife, but what about the rural women? They must be dying. This doctor cannot reach them. So he said to this doctor that go again to France, learn further, and come back and train all the rural dais or all rural midwives or all rural ladies who are doing delivery to conduct safe delivery. 300. He didn't spend his money building Taj Mahal, but he spent his money and orders and power to train rural women to conduct delivery. And this is the symbol of the 300-year-old Midwives Association of Sweden. And this is a picture of the box of instruments they used to carry 150 years ago, including obstetric forceps, including scissors, including medicines, etc. And if required, they would do surgery to remove the baby, not his cesarean section, but what is called as episiotomy, remove the baby from the lower side to save the woman. So they were empowered so much. They were trained, certified, and that is where the social priority was there in saving women. Sweden has a maternal mortality of 1 or 2 per 100,000 birth. We have about 100 per 100,000 birth. So if Swedish want to see Taj Mahal, they have to come to us. If we want to learn midwifery, we have to go to Sweden. So the point is, whatever social investment we as a society make, we will have to think in that direction. So don't think of Taj Mahals, but unfortunately, Taj Mahals are still being built. But our human resource investment in health and infrastructure and equipment is very, very less. Even now, nurses get paid 14,000 rupees a month on ad hoc basis, and they have to go on strike working in the COVID hospitals. You will be at least Gujarat. There are several such news coming. Doctors are on strike, nurses are on strike, they are underpaid, etc., etc. Many posts are vacant. So many parts of the country, we don't have RT-PCR machines, which cost 6 lakhs rupees, not very expensive. Many districts don't have that. Oxygen plants, vaccine storage, some of the new districts don't have, or even old districts don't have proper vaccine storage. Of course, CT scan, etc. should be there, but it's not there. And finally, zero attention to building repairs and maintenance. New building can and new Taj Mahal creation as our national passion, but we don't believe in maintaining and repairing and spending time and effort in making our assets more productive. So I want to come back to this unfinished agenda from 1% of GDP to 3% of GDP on health. We have been stuck at somewhere around 1.3, 1.2, I don't know, 1.4 maximum, but nowhere close to 3%. Only thing is buildings don't only help unless they are having staff, equipment, well maintained. And we are seeing in many channels now, because of the pandemic, people are going to rural areas and finding out what is the situation and not very good. In spite of our laudable effort of National Rural Health Mission, we still are building oriented system, not a service oriented. So our monitoring is how many PHC and subcenter and CHC buildings are built, not what is happening in there. So I think we have to also think of functionality of those services, not only the numbers of buildings. Third, I come to somewhat of again history. This is a very famous picture of Florence Nightingale in 1850s in a military hospital, which was very crowded. And she went there. She was not a nurse, but just as a society lady, curious to know why more people were dying in the hospital. British soldiers were dying in the hospital rather than in the battlefield. So she was very perturbed. This news appeared in the Times in England somewhere in this year. She read it and she became very, very upset, saying, how come young people are dying in the hospital? They should be saved in the hospital. So she went to the hospital and this is what she saw. Overcrowding, no proper arrangement, no nothing. And that transformed her life. She made the hospital look like this after some time. So it was a sea of change. You see the light coming, you see the distance between the beds, almost 6 feet, 8 feet distance, heating being put, some medicine, etc., etc. So she transformed from this to this without any authority, by her own efforts, on her heart, her motivation, persuasion. Unfortunately, we have stuck to what Florence Nightingale did about 160 years ago. This is the design of the Nightingale ward. She made this ward and that's what her name is. So one ward which will have several beds side by side and some nursing station, etc. And our public hospitals are still the same design. It's still designed on Florence Nightingale ward. Western countries have given up this ward long time ago. They have small single patient, two patient delivery rooms or patient wards, etc., in individual patient. And there's a lot of benefit to that. So my new vision is we should also now give up. Even in new AIIMS, we have this type of Florence Nightingale designed wards. Because we think the cheapest solution is the best because it costs less. It costs less number of nurses, less number of money. But our vision should be to change. Why individual room? Advantage is less infection control, more infection control, less infection, better privacy, better patient experience. What are the implications? More nurses are needed. It is better, you need more nurses. You have better care, better outcomes, and more employment of women. Today's age and time, one nurse looking after 40 people in one ward at night is a prescription for high mortality. And that is what is happening in our hospitals currently under COVID temporary hospitals. Nurses are looking after 20, 30 patients at night. So we have to change this. Related to that is we have to also change and promote nurse and midwife based care. India has 1.7 nurses per thousand population. WHO recommends 3 nurses per thousand population, which will mean India will need 42 lakh nurses. We have about half of them. Sweden, I saw my friend Dr. Ketan from Sweden. Sweden has 10 nurses per 1,000 people. If we use that ratio, we will need 1.4 crore nurses. I'm also not able to understand why Sweden needs so many nurses, but they have, and for a long time they have, and there is a social investment they have decided to make. And that's why they have one of the best health indicators, except in COVID, they made big mess and they are suffering from it. Okay, if we go to primary health care, the village level healthcare, we have one PHC with 1 or 2 doctors for 30,000 population, which was decided in 1985. Before that, there was one PHC for one community development block. Some of you who are old enough will remember this term called community development block, which was 1 or 2 lakh population. And Bihar still has that. So if you want to see the history of PHC, you can go to Bihar and still see it. Now, one doctor for 30,000 rural population, you compare with GPs in Britain. It is a 7-year trained GP, which serves 2,000 people on an average. So why is this difference? China created one barefoot doctor, they called doctor, but it is a health worker in 1960s and 70s for a village, which is roughly maybe 1,000. I don't know Chinese villages, but roughly 1,000 people per village, whatever is the village. We currently have one ANM for 5,000, which is a assistant nurse. ANM is a not fully qualified nurse. We made a provision of ASHA, a volunteer, partly paid volunteer for 1,000 in 2006 under NHM, and we say this is a great progress, and everybody is gaga about the great things. Of course, ASHAs are very important. They are very, very helpful. They have helped us, but we are still stuck in the model of primary health center of 1985. So my vision, and I wrote this before the budget this year, that why not think of a nurse, a 3-year fully trained, and I call it community health nurse, for each one village. We have 6 lakh villages. If you take a nurse salary as 20,000 rupees per month, you will need about 20,000 crores per year to have one nurse per village. It looks like a big amount, but really it's not that big. If you look at the benefits, if she is staying, if you can make her stay there, she will have 24/7 availability of health service or some type of primary care service in the village, early detection of disease, early direct detection of epidemics. Even her productivity will go up, because what currently happening is one ANM is looking after 3-4 villages. She is itinerant. She moves from one village to another. Maybe half her time goes in traveling rather than serving people. So this could be another new vision of health system, a nurse per village. Let us move ahead and see how can we design. Can we have, like a British system has, one GP per family, one general practitioner doctor per family, using a card, using a health passport, using a smart card, whatever, and IT possibilities are many. UK has this, and it is free care. And all GPs are private doctors. So we have lots of private doctors. We have a lot of people who need private doctor care. So what GP system in Britain did is they contracted with the private doctors to provide free care to the people. So we can develop similar kind of system. The current system of OPD care is not covered under Ayushman Bharat PMJY. Only indoor care is covered, and out-of-pocket expenditure, which is 70% of the total health expenditure, of which 70% is outdoor expenditure, OPD. So we have to think of covering outpatient care in some ways. One of the simpler ways is to develop a voucher scheme. And I have given just notional number of 1,000 rupees per family per year, vouchers of 1,000 rupees. So annual expenditure, roughly there are about 25 crore families, will be about 25 crore, thousand crores per year. If you add 5,000 crores of management cost, it will be about 30,000 crore per year. In that amount, all families will get one GP, or at least some doctor they can pay 1,000 rupees in terms of voucher, and they can select. They can go to any doctor who is available. Of course, in villages, you may not have so many doctors. Choice may be limited. In urban areas, you may have more choice. Similar can be another scheme for medication, because out-of-pocket expenditure, large amount is on medication. So we have to also think of another scheme of the same magnitude to cover medication cost. And so total between medication and GP cost will come to about 6,000 rupees, 6,000 crore rupees per year. And you can then decide whether you want to give the whole country, half of the country, whether you want to give 1,000 rupees, 2,000 rupees, 500 rupees, is a matter of detail. But principle could be that the central government or state government will give a voucher and people will go. Think about that. And it can be smart card, Aadhaar, whatever IT platforms. My question to all of you, is it economically, politically, and administratively feasible, doable? And if so, why are we not doing? How can we do it? Finally, I don't want to forget about public health, because that is where we haven't progressed so much, and that is where our mortality statistics and many other things are lacking. So we need a national or a state level cadre of well-selected, well-trained officer on the pattern of Indian administrative service or Indian many other central services. Roughly about 5 to 10 officers per district, which will add up, and including municipal corporations will add up about 10,000 public health officers. Now your question may be, what do public health officers do? They do all this: surveillance, monitoring, analysis, outbreak, disease prevention. Now all of this, you know how important it is in the times of COVID. Communication, emergency preparedness and recovery, environmental health, research, and health promotion. So all of this is the public health functions. It is not the function of a doctor. It is much beyond. Your doctor, if you have a doctor's background, it might help, but not necessarily. A nurse can do this. A science graduate can do this. And that is how many countries have their public health system open, like a MBA program, which is open to engineers, accountants, literature graduates, anybody, and can become a manager. Similarly, public health, national or state level cadre is required. Last 2 points, because Ratan Chandji had told me, telemedicine. It has a great potential, and it helped a lot in COVID pandemic, because many people, almost, there is a recent study in Ahmedabad area, one university did, 95% of people were treated at home for COVID. 5% were hospital admitted, and they were treated through this type of telephone medicine or telemedicine. So we have to now, using this experience of COVID, push telemedicine to a national level and make it much more practiced, much more feasible and doable. And the best telemedicine systems, if you don't know, has been developed in Canada, because in Canada there are many remote areas which are called fly-in community. The only way of mechanism of reaching there is to send an airplane. So anybody sick in that community, government has to send an airplane. That person is evacuated. He comes to the base hospital, then he's checked and then sent back. So 2 air trips free of cost. So, and then they realize that this is too expensive. So they put in a very good telemedicine system. So their flight costs were so much reduced. So we can learn from many countries. Northern England, Scotland has also good telemedicine. Wherever there are remote areas, it would be very useful. Finally, social determinants, and I don't want to go into details because time is short. Already nationally, we have announced tap water in each home, but along with that, drainage in each home should be also there. Otherwise, we'll have mosquito-borne diseases and trouble with that. I want to add the need for a Pakka house for all. We can't be a great nation with half of our or maybe more of our people living in kacha houses. And that is where with the cyclone and all this, we have so much of difficulty. And finally, universal health coverage system. And I talked about how do we cover outpatient. We have already covered some of the inpatient cost under PMJY. So it is only extension of that. And we can reach looking at some of the Southeast Asian countries, China and others, Brazil, Malaysia, and Thailand, and see how we can develop a universal healthcare system. With that, let me thank again all of you